What's up, everybody? Nate here. And when Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsed last month, pretty much everybody from Main Street to Wall Street saw that the banking sector could collapse sometime soon. But what they didn't realize is that the banking sector wasn't the one that was about to collapse, it was the consumer economy. Since those two banks ended up collapsing, well, pretty much every major bank in the United States has reported Q1 earnings. And pretty much every major bank didn't just beat expectations, they destroyed them. JP Morgan Chase, PNC, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Bank of America, the list goes on. Nearly every bank reported explosive profits in Q1 despite all of the bank uncertainty and two of the largest banking failures in American history. Meanwhile, there are more Americans than pretty much ever before living paycheck to paycheck. It's harder for Americans to get credit right now, and wages are in the gutter. So today I want to talk about how banks are doing so well despite all of this economic turmoil and how you can capture some of that success for yourself. So let's talk about why these banks recorded record earnings in Q1 2023. Well, part of the reason why these banks are doing so well right now is because of really high interest rates. Most of the profits that JP Morgan and Bank of America ended up bringing in Q1 were due to Americans going out and getting loans, but spending a lot more in order to get those loans. One of the primary ways that banks make money is through debt, and debt means that you're borrowing money from a financial institution. People typically borrow money for a variety of different reasons. Some of the biggest, though, are a new home purchase, or you need to get a car, or you need a personal loan or a home equity loan to build something new on your house or improvements. Now, the auto market and the housing market have definitely slowed down, but what is filling in the gaps for the banks is how high interest rates are going. For instance, the average interest rate for a 30-year fixed mortgage in the United States is around 6.5% right now. That means you're going to pay 6.5% in interest every single month to the bank. And while new mortgage purchases are down significantly from 2022 and 2021 levels, that doesn't really matter from the bank perspective because they're still making the same amount of money, if not more. Not to mention, home prices have not cratered like a lot of real estate agents and investors have been anticipating in 2023. So home prices are still staying really high and interest rates are staying really high too. So that means bigger mortgages for banks. That also means bigger interest payments. Now, the reason interest rates are so high in the United States right now has a lot to do with inflation and the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve had its interest rate set at around 0% over the last couple of years. And what that meant was a lot of Americans could go out and borrow money at a really cheap level. You were saving a ton of money if you got a home over the last couple of years because even though housing prices and car prices were spiking because of demand, well, you were still saving money because your interest rate was near 0%. Now, like I said though, when you have a lot of demand for something, well, you also have really heavily inflated prices, and everything in our economy has set new record highs in terms of price over the last couple of years. That creates a bit of a difficult situation for employers and employees and everybody in our economy because now you just need a whole lot more money in order to buy all of the same things, and that devalues your country's currency. If your country's currency continues to just be devalued, well, then you just need more and more and more of it. Now everybody has US dollars, which means nobody wants US dollars anymore. So the Federal Reserve in March of 2022 started to raise their interest rates to make it a lot harder for banks and corporations and consumers to borrow money. If it's harder for people to borrow money, then they're simply not going to be able to. So that means demand goes down, and when demand goes down, hopefully prices follow suit. Now, what you're probably thinking is, well, that's the Federal Reserve. So how does the Federal Reserve affect what banks are going to charge for their interest rates? Well, the Federal Reserve affects banks because banks get their money from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve interest rate is an overnight lending rate, which means basically the banks are going to go to the Federal Reserve in order to get that new currency to loan out to all of their customers. In a nutshell, if the Federal Reserve makes it difficult for banks to get their money, well, then banks are going to make it a lot harder for you to use theirs. And like I said before, what that leads to is record profits, right? Because now banks are making a killing on every single loan that they're giving out. Now, another reason why these banks broke record profits in Q1 2023 is because of the banking crisis with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. What you have to understand here is the banking situation was very, very complex, and what it caused was a lot of fear and anxiety from consumers in the banking sector. Even though this really only affected a lot of wealthy individuals individuals and a lot of business owners, while consumers felt that these issues were going to eventually trickle down to them. The reason Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsed was because they didn't have enough liquidity to give back all of the money that their depositors were asking for. They were taking huge losses in order to pay back their depositors, and that meant that they got really scared, caused a run on the bank situation where everybody flew to the bank and wanted their money back, but Silicon Valley Bank didn't have the funds to pay them back. The same thing happened with Signature Bank, although they had a little bit different of assets. Now, to be completely fair here, consumers were right. This did ultimately affect a lot of other banking sectors like regional banks all throughout the United States, but the reason it affected them is because of consumers. Customers of these regional banks like First Republic Bank and Comerica Bank and Fifth Third ended up pulling out around $100 billion worth of deposits from the bank. But where exactly did those deposits go? Well, they flooded into your major banks because they were considered a lot more stable. That means this $100 billion worth of liquidity just went into your major banks like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, you name it. So ultimately, the mini banking crisis that we had in the United States ended up making your major banks a whole lot richer. And if you want to capture the same financial success that these banks are seeing in 2023's economy, then you're going to have to stop thinking like your average American consumer and start thinking like the bank. I mentioned before, but one of the reasons why Silicon Valley Bank went under is because it didn't have enough liquidity. And this is something that pretty much every bank goes through when it takes in deposits. When you take your money and deposit it in the bank, well, that money is a liability to the bank if it's just sitting there in a vault. It's not gathering interest. It's not really doing anything for the bank. Over the years, banks have figured out a way to create a profit system off of your savings, and this is called fractional reserve lending. When you take $100 and deposit it into the bank, well, the bank doesn't just let that money sit there. It loans it out to people who are looking for a mortgage, people who are looking to buy a car. The bank also uses this money to invest in assets, things that are going to make them money over time, and your savings just sitting there is losing them money. All of the major security reasons aside for the banks just holding hundreds of billions of dollars in local banks, well, you also have the issue of inflation. Inflation means that your money is losing value over time, and typically in a normal year, the inflation rate in the United States hovers around the 1% to 3% mark. That means every single dollar that you have in the bank is losing around 3% of its buying power every single year. So the banks don't want to lose money on all of this money that they're bringing in. They would rather invest in assets that are going to gain in value 7 to 10% in the stock market or in the real estate market, or they're going to charge people for taking on loans by using the bank. But the secret is you can do the exact same thing. With $100 billion floating into JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America and Wells Fargo, well, now the bank has $100 billion more to go out and invest and $100 billion more to lend out to people looking for a mortgage. The bank gets richer the more money you keep at the bank. So you have to limit your exposure to this by only keeping what you need at a bank. You don't want to just save all of your money away here. You don't want to take everything you have and just shove it into a bank because over time it's losing value. You want to take a certain amount of money from every single paycheck and invest it so that way your money is earning value, not losing value. Like I said, you want to have a certain amount of money in the bank, so I recommend keeping a certain amount of money that is going to protect you in an emergency situation. So around $2,000 to $3,000 is more than enough to protect you in an emergency situation. So you want to have that much sitting at the bank. Then if you go beyond that, you might want to keep around 6 months to around 10 months worth of an emergency savings in case you lose your job or you need to make a major purchase. That money is better held in a bank because you have immediate access to it. But you don't want to save beyond that because now your money is just going to be losing value. So initially you want to have that initial savings in order to protect you, and then you might want to do a little bit more in order to make a big purchase. But beyond that, you do not want to keep any more money at the bank because it's just going to lose value over time, and that costs you money. So like I said, once you have all of that money in the bank, everything else that you would normally put in the bank will start investing that money. Now your money is gaining value and it's making you money over time. That is going to build your wealth, and it's how the banks have built their wealth over the last century or so. Now, obviously, I am just some random guy on the internet and I am not your financial advisor here. So you always want to do your own due diligence when you make an investment and when you decide to do business with a bank. I can't tell you exactly what to do here because your personal goals and your personal financial goals are going to be very much different from my own personal goals. So you need to make the best decisions for you, and that means contacting a professional financial advisor and doing your own due diligence. Because I have no right to be advising you. Banks are really powerful tools in your financial journey, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't use a bank. What I'm saying is learn how the banking system works so you can benefit from it. Banks have a lot of things figured out in order to make money, so why not use those strategies to make yourself wealthy instead of the bank? But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it for free by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything else happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out updates on this channel 7 days a week, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it from me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.